Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of genetic purity and genetic heritage, lineage, and so on. Now, to some people, this is very important, and I probably underestimated, I guess, how important genetic purity is to many people who come from third world, peasant, tribal, basket case societies. Now, I know it's very important to Indians, and even Indians that you'd think would be more towards the peasant class end of things. With the Brahmins, I can appreciate it a little bit more. The apex, the demigod class of the Indian society. But for the people lower down that caste, CASTE, that caste food chain, you'd think it would be less relevant, but it's still relevant. And again, there's not an Indian I know who doesn't want to. Well, no, actually, there's some maybe would stray from a little bit, but nearly all of them, they insist on genetic purity. Genetic purity is absolutely pivotal to them. And which is why, as I've pointed out a number of times, if you just say to Indians, look, if you want to migrate to the West, you cannot import husbands and brides from the village of your ancestors. You must marry a locally born person. Then the Indians just wouldn't come. It is so important to them, not simply genetic purity, but cultural purity. Because if they marry say a guy marries a local, an Indian girl but she's a locally born Australian born girl, then the cultural purity is compromised, and this also is important to them. So they have to keep that pure culture and genetics by importing husbands and brides. I mean, it's insane. It's crazy. A lot of the Arabic tribal peoples from the Middle East have the same view, as do Pacific Islanders and so on. So the more you come from a basket case tribal primitive society, the more this genetic purity is important. Now, if you come from the elite class, then genetic purity is poo-pooed if white people insist on it or want it or prefer it. But if black and brown people want to do it, then that's lauded as being stunning and brave and multicultural and so on. So a lot of hypocrisy is through this consideration and discussion. But what I want to talk about was an Islander lady, and she's married to an Islander guy, and they also have this genetic cultural purity thing. It's quite important to them, and very important to them, in fact. And you've got to wonder why. I mean, why is it so relevant? And you come from a basket case tribal society where you still live in grass huts and you didn't even have the wheel and this sort of stuff, and yet this is something that worries you. Aren't there bigger fish to fry, you'd think? Anyway, she gets one of these ancestry heritage DNA test things done, and it comes back that she's got 10% Indian and Southern Indian, the peasant Indian, which is like double back. So not only is she not 100% Islander pure, but the part of the Indian, the 10% part of her heritage, which is Indian, is from the peasant Indian sort of side of things, which is sort of doubly concerning. So she's suicidal about it. I mean, she's absolutely distraught and beside herself and losing the plot and all this sort of stuff over this. Now, it's only 10%. Why would you care? But what it means is one of her great or grandparents was Indian, or had a sizable portion of Indian blood in them, probably full-blood Indian if you look at the percentages. Or it's possible, I guess, that more than one could have had some Indian blood in them. Now, this is hardly surprising because labourers were brought into the islanders are not noted for their sense of industry and reliability. So indentured Indian sort of slave type workers, if you want to call it that, although it wasn't really that, were brought in to do various sort of plantation work, and they were experienced with this from say places like Sri Lanka as a case in point. So anyway, they were so these Indians were around the Pacific Islands, particularly when the French and the British and so on were the primary traders and the maritime powers in the area. So it's not really that surprising in the overall scheme of things to find some Indian blood mixed in there. Why should it be a big deal though? Now, my sort of genetic heritage is English, Scottish, French, and Danish. In proportion. So and a couple of 1 or 2% in there as well. But that's I don't care. It doesn't bother me either way. Not something I think about or care about. But then the difference between the Norman French, the Danes, the English tribes, or the English people at the time, all that sort of thing, then they would have been very similar people. There would have been, had very, very little difference between them in terms of genetics, really, I would think. But anyway, it doesn't concern me one whit. But it's driving this woman insane, this idea that she's not 100%. Now, it's also something that some of the Chinese are particularly concerned about, and some of the, the Pacific Islanders in this case, the Indians are vitally concerned about it. And people that you'd think, you guys are peasants. Well, why would you give a fuck? But they do, and it is very important to them. But this brings in really the next sort of level of comprehension of this. These people don't want to dilute their what they perceive as their purity. So the Islander people are sending back to the islands, the Pacific Islands, sending back to the islands for husbands and brides. The Indians send back for husbands and brides. The Arabs send back for husbands and brides. And there's very little, in fact, minuscule amounts of racial integration through marriage and thus leading into, of course, procreation. So on that basis, just how quickly would integration, if at all, take place? The people that arrived in the Anglos, the Saxons that arrived in England in 500 AD, for example, they considered themselves as English as anyone else, and the people the Normans that arrived in what today is France, again, around that time and even later than that, they consider themselves as French today. And there's intermarriage and procreation, all those sorts of things. They don't consider themselves as a separate, unique enclave that have nothing to do with France or not. So this is something that mass migration west will need to face. These people don't want to integrate. They want genetic purity, which militates very heavily and strongly against any form of integration. Now, sure, the globalist elites can say, well, it's all the white people's fault. That's because all white people are Hitler. No. That's got nothing to do with it. Now, I don't know. There's when I think about it, what will be my preference if I was out and about? I'm married, but if I was out and about looking to get married, I would prefer a white person. I wouldn't be absolutely against a white person. People fall in love, for goodness sakes. It doesn't mean, nationalities don't necessarily mean a lot if you're just falling in love with something. That can, that can be irrelevant or less relevant maybe. But it's not to some of these people. Now, I know younger Indians, they're born in Australia. And there's a young Indian woman that I know, she's born in Australia, and she was dating a local white guy in Australia. And this was frowned upon very much by her family. Then she declared that she wanted to marry this white guy, this local white guy in Australia. And then all hell broke loose, and they threatened her, the Indian community and her family threatened her with excommunication. She'd be cut out of the will. She'd be banned forever. You can never darken our doors again, and all this sort of stuff. And so withering pressure was brought to bear, not simply from immediate family members, but cousins, aunts, uncles, and nephews, and goodness knows what. So under the face, in the face of such a storm of emotional and protests and, by the way, numerous threats that I thought were rather high-handed, she caved in and agreed to marry an Indian guy imported from the village of her ancestors. She even wanted to broker the difference, say, look, I'll marry a local Indian guy. Like, I'll marry an Indian guy, but he's locally born. No, even that wouldn't do. And again, they made all sorts of threats. So there are some, if you broke down that severe family pressure that's brought to bear, I'm sure there would be, locally born Indians marrying other locally born Indians, and this then over time would, but that's not happening either. That this importing of husbands and brides to keep the genetics and the culture fresh, whether it's Pacific Islanders, Indians, or Arabs or Chinese, it doesn't matter. As long as that happens, is allowed to happen, there won't be any integration. And also in things like, say in medieval times, in order to create family loyalties and or to indicate you were a part of that local society or community, it was almost necessary for you to marry a local person, because that would clearly demonstrate your commitment to the local village, the local society, the local businesses, and so on and so forth. Whereas if you imported a husband or a bride, you would be seen as an outsider who didn't want to integrate, couldn't be trusted, and so on and so forth. So this is a hurdle we're all going to have to, the West, this commitment to mass migration. It's an issue that it's going to have to be dealt with. But it intrigued me, this peasant islander girl is about to leap off a tall building just because she's not genetically pure with islander blood. I mean, for goodness sake. But it shows, to me at least, it demonstrates that these people, they're just here for the money. They're not here to integrate or become part of our society. Far from it. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.